I just want to introduce our first guest now. We're very privileged to have a well-known New Zealand pilot. Really, I think for most people he doesn't even need an introduction. I'd just like to bring up Tait.
Thanks, Dave. I would like to just say that it's a privilege and a surprise. It mixed with a little bit of terror, actually, to be standing here on this hallowed ground of Warbirds in front of a very, what was the word I had? Auspicious group of gentlemen. What you're about to see is a presentation I put together about 30 years ago, mainly because I thought I was getting ready to lose my marbles. A lot of you probably thought I lost my marbles a lot before that. Anyhow, we'll get on with the show, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope it all works.
Do we need to dip the lights? Is there lights?
Welcome. May I introduce myself? My name is Tait. The story you are about to be told would never have happened had it not been for two factors. One, World War II occurred during my impressionable years and developed within me a strong sense of patriotism and national pride. I was then, sadly, too young to serve overseas like so many gallant soldiers, but harboured a wish to be of service, given the opportunity. However, there were no popular wars for me to prove myself. Not that the war to end all wars did end all the wars. Contrary to public opinion, wars do not signify the end of conflict. There will always be an aggressor, even amongst one's own kind. There will always be a need for vigilance and need for those who will fight for what is right. Combined, complacency and selfishness destroys nations. I strongly believe that life for all would be better if we took no more than we gave and gave a little more than we take. The second factor was Joyce, my wife. After a financial disaster in the mid-60s, we had moved our young family of 4 children to Hamilton to make a new start. Although we both worked hard and began to struggle out of our difficulties, I was often a little depressed. But when Joyce suggested I take up flying as a cure, that came as a bit of a shock. We had no money, and I certainly did not believe I had the academic capabilities to learn to fly an aircraft. My educational qualifications were zilch. Pilots were people I held in awe. However, Joyce insisted. I probably didn't take much persuasion, but being a person who always does as he is told, off I went to the Waikato Aero Club for flying lessons. Well, it was easier than I thought, and before a few months had passed, I held a private pilot's license. I was 37 years of age at the time. Around about this time, the UK threatened to cut its traditional market ties with New Zealand. New Zealanders were urged to get out and find alternative markets, especially for its primary produce. Being a rather complacent lot, New Zealand did nothing. Tomorrow was another day. Then I had what I thought to be a gem of an idea. Actually, in hindsight, it was a wacky idea. A Hamilton company had just begun to build a tiny 2-seat training aircraft called an Air Tourer. Now, why don't I fly one around the world as a promotion of New Zealand? It would be the smallest aircraft to ever attempt such a flight, the first by a non-professional pilot, the first by a New Zealand aircraft, and the first by a Kiwi. Who says Kiwis cannot fly? It wouldn't be easy, except for a sea voyage on the good ship Wanganella in the 30s to Australia. I'd never been out of the country, and I had less than 100 hours total flying experience, and I did not own an aircraft. Well, probably not surprisingly, rather than my proposal being accepted as a genuine demonstration of a desire to do my bit, I was ostracised by the Waikato Club and ridiculed by almost all in aviation. Absolutely impossible, totally beyond the aircraft's capabilities, they said. And certainly far beyond my experience to have any chance of success. Wouldn't even get to the first proposed stop of Norfolk Island, they said. With rare exceptions, support was non-existent. Also, the tall poppy syndrome became very evident, and my idealistic, mythical notion that all New Zealanders were equal in status was shattered. I was born on the wrong side of the track, so to speak, and should not step outside societal boundaries. That was the message. Sir Keith Park, a very prominent New Zealand airman, scathingly described me as a would-be Sir Francis Chichester. All the negativity fired up my stubborn streak, and deciding to prove I was just as capable as anyone, I slowly overcame all obstacles. With a loan from the company I worked for as a sales rep, Dimmock Machines, I purchased an aircraft from Aero Engine Services of Rockahia, Hamilton. In its standard configuration, the 115 horsepower Air Tourer, primarily designed for local flying and training, did not carry sufficient fuel for the long overwater legs I had planned. So I calculated a minimum fuel requirement and designed an extra tankage system to be fitted inside the cockpit. A Hamilton sheet metal firm, who proved very sympathetic, built these for me. A special dispensation was obtained to exceed the maximum all-up weight of the aircraft by 20%, and being so heavy, it would often require a take-off run of 2 miles of runway before becoming airborne. The instrumentation was very basic. For navigation, one only radio direction finder. An amateur radio operator, commonly called a ham, built a tiny HF radio transmitter and had it installed in the aircraft so that I could keep contact with air traffic authorities throughout the world. I would have to plug in a crystal each time I changed frequency. Hamilton Radio Hams set up a worldwide network of hams to meet me at various stopovers and relay progress back home. Royal Elms of London agreed to pay for my fuel. On May the 12th, I climbed into the cockpit of Air Tourer ZK-CXU, named Miss Jaycee, J for Joyce and C for Cliff, and after a fond and tearful farewell with my family, commenced my very lonely one-man Promote New Zealand flight. My flying experience was minuscule, a mere 200 hours of flying time, but during the past 2 years I had meticulously studied every aspect of the proposed flight. In addition, I had gained the first private pilot instrument rating ever to be issued in New Zealand and felt quietly confident both in myself and the aircraft. My approach towards even a flight in local areas has always been to plan well in advance and to be alert for all contingencies. I intended that this flight would be no exception. I always intended to be totally professional in all my flying activities and to expect no special favours. Joyce often complained that whenever I was planning a flight, I would withdraw into myself, almost cutting her out in my preoccupation with the task at hand. We are seen here waiting for takeoff clearance at Hamilton Airport, with my family and a small group of well-wishers gazing on. I have no doubt that Joyce was apprehensive and she felt she would never see me again. Were to take me up the Pacific Ocean via the Solomons, Guam and Japan, thence across the Aleutians via Russia. Although it was originally expected that approval would be given to land on the Kamchatka Peninsula for refueling, Upon arrival in Japan, I was informed that the Russians had refused, so I was forced to personally dismantle my aircraft in Tokyo, containerise it and ship it to Seattle, thence by rail to Vancouver. Back home, Joyce arranged a second mortgage on our home to pay for the shipping costs. My task had now been made much more difficult. I had no aircraft building skills, and therefore an offer by a New Zealand aircraft engineer living at Nanaimo near Vancouver to help me reassemble it was gratefully received. I then recommenced the flight through the Rocky Mountains across Canada to Hamilton, Ontario, giving numerous media interviews on the way. There I was met by amateur radio friends and at a civic function presented a letter to the Mayor of that city from the Mayor of Hamilton, New Zealand, Michael Minogue. From there it was across to Greenland and a brush with death. Fog closed my destination airport and I was forced to divert north. Problem was, my compasses were faulty and I could not see where I was going because of the fog. I was unable to climb and endured 10.5 hours of flying solely by instruments, unable to see outside the cockpit, not really knowing in which direction I was flying, expecting any moment to crash into a mountain. It was almost midnight. I thought a lot about my family and I prayed. When I did break clear, a most inhospitable sight lay below. Cold sea, icebergs and a craggy foreshore. 2 hours later, almost out of fuel, I landed at Sonderstrom, had a quick sleep, refueled and set off across the 10,000 feet high ice cap for Kolasuk. Short on horsepower and heavy with fuel, it took 2 hours of circling before I could reach the 11,000 feet necessary to attempt the crossing, and this in itself was quite demanding as the cloud base merged with the ice, resulting in no horizon. Kolasuk, seen here below, was no more than a rough strip hewn out of volcanic rock. From there on to Reykjavik in Iceland and down to Scotland. We're seen here awaiting takeoff at Prestwick. Thence to London, Marseille, Rome, Athens, Cyprus and Damascus. Here I was arrested at gunpoint and interrogated for 2 hours before being permitted to proceed, but not before they had confiscated much of my film. I had landed in the midst of a war. The next stop was at Saudi Arabian airport of Badan, where I was again arrested and held for 3 days before being allowed to proceed. I had landed without clearance in order to pick up fuel because of my haste to get out of Damascus. I had not taken on sufficient to make it to Bahrain. These are my captors at the Sand Surface Aerodrome after my release. And this is their town. Outside air temperatures, 50 degrees Celsius. 80 days after departure, on the 1st of August, I arrived back in New Zealand to a civic reception from Hamilton citizens that had been initiated by the Hamilton Radio Club. As promised to Joyce, I was back in time for my wedding anniversary on the 2nd of August, but only just. I was ill, tired and debilitated by dehydration and semi-starvation. My body weight had plummeted from a normal 9.5 stone to 7 stone. For the most part, New Zealand turned its back on the effort by Miss Jacey and myself, declaring our survival an act of God and refusing any acknowledgement. To repay debts, I sold my aircraft to the Eagle Flying Academy and returned to my work as a sales representative. In typical Kiwi fashion, New Zealand Aviation, with rare exception, still refused to support the homegrown Air Terror aircraft. The RNZAF, however, did, albeit rather reluctantly, purchase 4, and a further 8 were ordered for delivery to developing nations under the Colombo 8 program. They were to be flown to their destinations. However, the company experienced difficulties with the pilot they engaged to carry out the deliveries, and I was quite thrilled when Managing Director Alf Coleman asked if I would assist. The original pilot had an aversion to single-engine sea crossings. In 1971, I was commissioned to deliver 7 air tours to Indonesia, Singapore and Thailand. These aircraft were fitted with a much greater horsepower engine than my CXU. This is one such aircraft overnighting at Norfolk Island. more air tours at Singapore, and another en route to Indonesia, shown here at Darwin. The company, under the guiding hand of Managing Director Alf Coleman, developed a military trainer. In 1973, a new company was created, New Zealand Aerospace, and the prototype CD4 unveiled. Employing 350 people, the company prospered and began tuning out the CT4 air trainer and the Fletcher top dresser in ever-increasing numbers. Against much opposition, Alf had employed me as chief pilot. Aviation was still smarting from my successes, and many were very antagonistic. My duties were test flying, demonstrations, and both national and international delivery. It was also my responsibility to train and prepare the flights for other pilots whom I engaged to help out when there were more aircraft to be delivered than I could cope with. This aircraft has been prepared for delivery to Australia. This one shows me demonstrating a Fletcher to a group of potential clients who were visiting the factory facility. This aircraft is en route to Australia, and this is the same aircraft almost at its destination. This CD4 is mixing it with its bigger brothers at Ohakia. Both hard points for armament and wingtip tanks were experimented with. The tanks gave the aircraft a sleek look and had no vices. That configuration was never put into production. Aside from actual navigation planning, there is a mountain of paperwork that accompanies each individual flight. Diplomatic clearances must be arranged before departure, and individual clearances obtained upon entry and departure of every airport en route. Plus, of course, immigration clearances, weather briefings, and flight plan approval, all of which can add up to 5 hours ground work per stopover. Flights were generally very lonely affairs, but on rare occasions 2 aircraft would proceed together. This could occur when aircraft were dispatched together, or as a result of my meeting up with a previously dispatched aircraft that had encountered unserviceabilities en route, with the pilot electing to wait for my arrival to fix the problem. Both the fuel system and the avionics were extremely unreliable, and I always carried a kit of tools to effect repairs. Sometimes I would repair radios while airborne, flying the aircraft with a stick clamped between my knees so that my hands could be free. These 2 are en route to Thailand, and the same aircraft are shown here being refuelled at Bali. This aircraft I have just delivered to Karachi. The solitude of the long over water crossings are occasionally relieved by the sighting of shipping. Below is a Russian trawler somewhere mid-Tasman. Temperatures fluctuated between very cold and oppressively hot, with cockpit temperatures often over the 50°C range. Passing over Wedge, an airport on the banks of the Red Sea, during a long hot desert crossing on the way to Cairo. Approaching Baghdad. Although the aircraft were not designed for bad weather operation, waiting for ideal conditions was not an option if deliveries were to remain on schedule. After a few tentative forays, I found it relatively safe to penetrate even the most threatening looking thunderstorms, CBs. Rather than divert, it was, in my view, more important to stay on track, to ride out the turbulence, almost ignoring the altimeter, but concentrating on airspeed and direction. Plus, of course, staying the right way up. Flying between CBs had its own hazard when lightning zapped from one to the other, especially hard-stopping at night.
Get a 3.7 for 170. Southwest 383, roger. Climb and maintain 17 south.
17 south, Southwest 383.
Not only are thunderstorms a hazard, but sandstorms, which can extend as high as 10,000 feet and way above the ceiling of the aircraft, reducing visibility on the ground and in the air to zero, are just as difficult. Watching the sun go down can be a beautiful experience, and as night falls, the coolness is a welcome relief from a day's exposure to the burning sun. Below is Lord Howe Island, sometimes a refuelling stop en route to Australia. Because of the very basic and unreliable navigation equipment carried, primary navigation was by using the signs provided by Mother Nature. Clouds slope with the wind and indicate wind direction. Ground speed is improved by flying with the slope. Smoke from chimneys and bushfires are also helpful. But the most accurate indication of wind speed and direction is that obtained from the sea. With no equipment with which to measure drift, it was necessary to fly quite low to the water if this information was to be useful, and my methods of navigation were quite controversial. Wind rolls the waves forward, showing the wind direction, and the amount of white water indicates the wind strength. Armed with that information, it is relatively simple to adjust an aircraft's heading to remain on track and time. Old seafarers call this method the Beaufort scale. As always, engine failures were uppermost in the mind. The chances of surviving a ditching were pretty slim, but here we try a little light-hearted practice just off Kiowa.